Unprecedented numbers of people are risking their lives to reach Europe. Fleeing civil war and instability, thousands of migrants continue to take perilous boat journeys to get here. Many drown en route. What is being done to tackle this humanitarian crisis? Welcome to On the Front Line. Italy's small island of Lampedusa. Next to Africa, the tiny Mediterranean territory is synonymous with desperate people in search of a safe haven. In 2013, Europe was shocked into action when more than 350 people drowned close to the island's shores.
I arrived at the scene 2 minutes after the last person was saved. All the others were pulled out of the wreck at the bottom of the sea, as we all know. We remained there, trying to find the sunken ship. It was found early in the afternoon, thanks to sonar. Then the recovery began.
Italy's response was to launch Mare Nostrum. Credited with saving tens of thousands of lives, the search and rescue operation wound up last October after Rome ran out of money. Other EU countries refused to finance the mission, arguing it acted as a pull factor for migrants. Since then, a much smaller protection operation called Triton, run by the EU's border agency Frontex, is in place.
Triton is the EU's hypocritical answer. Europe is trying to reassure European citizens by saying, we are here to stop them. But it's impossible to stop people coming by sea. This is something we cannot do, something that Europe cannot do, and what's more, they know they cannot do it.
On current projections, this year will surpass 2014, which was a record year for migrant deaths. With 4 patrol boats manned by 20 crew, the island's coastal resources are stretched.
We have 5 people on this Coast Guard cutter. That includes a doctor and a nurse who can give on-board medical assistance. We also have a naval lifeguard.
The explosion in violence across the Middle East and Africa has led experts to warn we are in the midst of the biggest global refugee crisis since the Second World War. That prospect, combined with fewer resources, raises fears there will only be one outcome: more death at sea. We will go back to Lampedusa shortly. Joining me now to discuss this further is Fabrice Leggeri, Director of Frontex, the EU's border agency, and Eugenio Ambrosi from the International Office of Migration. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on the front line. Mr. Leggeri, I'd like to begin with you. You've said up to 1 million migrants could leave Libya to Europe. Do you have the resources to deal with such an influx, and how sure can you be about these numbers?
Well, it is in open sources that 100,000 of migrants potentially are waiting at the vicinity of the European Union. But that doesn't mean that all these migrants will head to Europe this year or next year. But what we have to do is to get prepared, and that's what Frontex is doing. That's what the EU...
Are you prepared?
We have extended Triton operation until the end of 2015, and I am preparing the budget for next year, 2016, in close relation with the European Commission. And so I can say that the level of the budget will be at least next year 115 million euros. But I would like also to say that Triton is one part of the EU response to that situation.
Sure, but it has no search and rescue mandate. It doesn't have the same resources dedicated to it like Italy's Mare Nostrum. Is it a credible alternative?
It is a good compromise between different challenges we have to face. But first of all, I would like to say that despite we don't have a search and rescue mandate, we contribute to search and rescue. Frontex and the EU cannot have a search and rescue mandate because the search and rescue competence belongs to the states. But there is a contribution, and 1/3 of the lives saved since the launch of Triton last year, on the 1st of November 2014, 1/3 of the lives saved have been saved by contribution of Frontex.
Simple question, do you need more resources?
The European Parliament voted an amendment in December last year that increased Frontex budget by 20 million euros.
That's nothing.
Well, Frontex and Triton operation is not supposed to replace the member states' capacities. That means that the European Union today is organized in such a way that the responsibility of border checks lies with member states. So Frontex can provide additional cooperation, additional operational solidarity to the member states.
Thank you. Mr. Ambrosi, there's a major humanitarian crisis on Europe's doorstep. Why is the EU failing to get a grip of this?
The EU still lacks a common EU policy on migration. You don't have one way of tackling the issue. You have 28 different ways of tackling the migration challenges that Europe is facing. So the problem is not whether Triton is efficient or Mare Nostrum was more efficient. The problem is what mandate the EU wants to give to its own institution in order to tackle the challenges. And the confusion or the lack of clear mandate in terms of tackling the challenges is due to the fact that you don't have one way.
Essentially, and it might be a little bit harsh to say this, but critics say this policy can be summed up in 3 words: let them drown. What would you say to that?
Well, I would hope that there is no intention anywhere among the 28 EU member states to have that kind of policy. But undoubtedly, we have to face the situation that as long as EU migration policy remains as it is, then the risk of drowning in the Mediterranean will increase. It is true that traffickers and smugglers are capitalizing on the desperation of the people that are trying to reach Europe. And any time legal entry is difficult, then smugglers increase their business.
All right, thank you. Our correspondent, Simona Volta, is in Lampedusa. Simona, you filed that report at the beginning of this programme. Tell us a little bit about what's happening right now on the island.
Well, Paul, due to the strong winds since we've been here in Lampedusa, the boats didn't arrive on the island, but the situation will certainly change in the next few days when the sea condition will improve. Join me, the mayor of Lampedusa, Giusy Nicolini. Lampedusa è pronta.
Is Lampedusa ready to deal with any new boats arriving?
Lampedusa is always ready. The Coast Guard services are ready, the reception centres are ready, the island is ready, absolutely. But what I'm concerned about, on the other hand, is the fact that our country in Europe every year seems to be unprepared. We have had boats coming in for over 20 years. It's not just something which has been happening recently, and we've been talking about what's been happening and what's not been happening for this whole time.
What could be done now to change this situation in the long term?
We would completely need to change our approach to the Mediterranean. We would need to start recognizing that these people are asking for help. They are asking Europe for help as they flee wars and disasters, and they have the right to do this before they even get onto a boat. I will never stop saying this. I will never stop tiring of saying this, because that's the only solution. Europe will continue to take people in emergency situations, and of course we want to bring the number of deaths and disasters down. But we also want this to be legally enshrined in the Mediterranean area. We want to tackle human trafficking and put a stop to this, and make the future of our continent more human and more decent.
Back to you, Paul.
Simona, thank you. Mr. Ambrosi, we've just heard about the reality on the ground there in Lampedusa, but this issue of immigration is politically toxic. European politicians want to pull up the drawbridge, not lower it even further.
Well, I think that is a mistake, and it's a mistake based on the reality and the numbers that talks about migration and demography in Europe. The reality is that in a very short period of time, the European Union will need an increased number of labour migrants coming from outside. It's an economic reality of the Union itself.
The problem is that there isn't the willingness on the part of European countries to do that. It's not going to happen.
Well, but if it's not happening, then the disaster that Europe will have in a few years' time will be much greater than what we are facing right now. The reality is that migrants and migration, if managed properly, is beneficial for country of arrivals. Country in Europe, if they stop migration completely, will lose around 10, 11 point GDP, percentage point.
Okay, all right. Italy has proposed setting up a network of migration centres to process migrant claims, asylum seekers' claims in North Africa. Do you think this is a good idea, Mr. Leggeri?
Well, as far as I know, those projects would be launched in close cooperation with IOM and the UNHCR and with a very strong involvement of the European Union. So I think this would be under this kind of condition, this would ensure the implementation of fundamental rights.
Mr. Ambrosi?
It depends what centre are we talking about. Centre to process asylum request would raise a series of questions, I would think, also legally. The main question is, if we establish this centre, what is the objective? To facilitate processing and then move them to Europe, or to facilitate processing and then leave them where they are processed, i.e. in North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa?
Is there a viable way forward out of this long-standing problem?
Well, I think all EU frontline states should be supported more. And one way of supporting them more is for the 28 EU member states to share a bit more the responsibility and the charge of the arrival and the flows that, of course, hit by definition frontline state. Europe is discussing a lot these days for a resettlement program of refugees from various crises around the world. It's an area that is very important, but where Europe is lagging a little bit behind compared to other countries of the world. So the sharing of the responsibility is the first step, the first concrete step that the EU can make very rapidly to start easing some of this problem.
Europe needs to take more responsibility. What would you say to that, Mr. Leggeri?
Well, this is a political issue, but for sure Frontex agency, as an operational agency, is ready to get more responsibility. But it's true that if we get more responsibility, it means we will need more budget, probably more staff to a certain extent, operational staff at least. But something is also very important to know, is that Frontex operations have to rely on national assets. And I launched a call for a contribution to the member states. So it's an ongoing call. Money is one thing, but we also need the assets, so the boats, the patrolling boats, the helicopters, the aircraft. This is how we can really implement a mission in the Mediterranean Sea or at land borders.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. That's it for this edition of On the Front Line. You can find us on social media as well as Euronews.com. Until next month, thanks for watching.